I wanted to just quickly introduce our speakers. Patrick Blenkarn and Laurel Green. Sorry.
It's all good.
Do my homework. And I want to explain why they're here. About 2 weeks ago, one of the curators at the ICA, which is the Institute for Institute for Contemporary Art, sent me a message and said, "Hey, did you know Asses.masses is coming to Boston? You might want to see it." And I'm like, "I do, and plus, yes, and can we invite them to campus to talk?" So here they are. Thank you so much for making the flyer and organizing everything overnight, basically.
Great flyer.
What they're going to do is they're going to tell us about their process of making this really cool, massively multiplayer offline performance game thing. And then we'll have a conversation with them about it. So with no further ado, here is Laurel and Gavin.
Thank you. Thanks for having us, Celia.
I'm very happy to be here. As Celia said, I'm Patrick.
And I'm Laurel.
And we are two of the three creative directors of the newly founded studio called Studio FUNFUG. We are Canadian, and this is what we're going to talk about today.
So today we're going to introduce ourselves, the work we do at the intersection of games, performance, and social transformation. And then we're going to take you through some of the ideas and core concepts for making the game for performance, asses.masses. And we're going to talk more generally about our game design process. So the process of programming, writing, and designing for an audience heard. So a video game that is played as a live experience. And then we will leave lots of time for questions. So if while we're talking, something's popping into your head, you can either write it down or you can throw your hand up and interrupt, add to, popcorn in. It's absolutely fine. So let's start with who are we? Patrick.
My name is Patrick. It's human pronouns. I was born in Ottawa, which is the capital of Canada, and that becomes important later on. And I have an undergrad in philosophy, theater history, cinema history, and an MFA in interdisciplinary art, which largely took the form of participatory visual art kind of experience. I kind of took a side step from theater, but my formation I would consider fundamentally in the world of theater as a stage director that has expanded into things like programming, animation, music, and yeah, that's
And my name is Laurel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a PhD student at York University in Toronto. I go to the School of Art, Media, Performance, and Design, where I'm really focused on this intersection of performance and games for social transformation. I also have a background as a professional dramaturg and producer. So I work with arts companies, specifically in the creation and development and touring of interdisciplinary performance. And while at York, I am part of a few cool research modules, including a program called Connected Minds that explores the impacts of emerging technologies on what they call the techno-social collective. So I like to frame my work up as being invitations to participate and provocations for change. So this is bringing together participatory performances. And what does that mean? Well, that's performances in which audiences are invited to become active agents, moving between the roles of spectator and performer. And I approach games as playful modes of systems thinking. So using mechanics to embody and tell stories about the systems we live in. And then how do we use this work to give agency to communities of players within a collective experience? So if the game can kind of make an argument about or frame up or embody a system and we can play within it, how can we begin to shift those systems, renegotiate our roles as players, and really draw attention to and start to change and transform the social contracts that we live and work within? In other words, how do the ways in which we play together impact the ways in which we live, work, and build communities?
So the studio that we founded is myself, Laurel, and Milton Lim, who is not here today. And it largely emerged out of the project Asses.masses, but also the other projects that Milton and I had started in 2017, and then Laurel joined in 2020, going into 2021. And we sort of worked collaboratively as a trio, duos, sort of like mixtures in different capacities ever since. It's basically trying to do all the things that Laurel says. Yeah,
we do them together.
FUNFUG is the German word for nonsense or horseplay, and we added an extra F to make it more fun. That's what it means.
So what does our work look and feel like? It looks like video games for the stage. It looks like tabletop role-playing games to reimagine the arts ecosystem. It looks like a giant escape room style relay game played in the Humboldt Forum.
German Museum.
Yeah, in a German museum. It looks like game design workshops. It looks like town hall sessions. It looks like competitive card games on stage.
And a whole smattering of other things.
I just want to draw attention when we talk about this idea of games as systems thinking. Two of the projects that really underpin the work we do at Studio FUNFUG were a game called Farce that we created. This was a tabletop role-playing game to reimagine the arts ecosystem that blends Dungeons and Dragons with a map-making game like A Quiet Year. And this was a game about how the art systems function that was played by arts leaders from across Canada and internationally over 4 days. And Factory, a residency game, which was a game to embody the organizational change proposed in a theater company's strategic plan. So if Farce is really about how the whole arts ecosystem functions more broadly, Factory was a game about how a company functions within that system. And really, the research question underneath all of that was, can playful in-game solutions yield real-world shifts in our industry systems?
I would say for everybody thinking about imaginary worlds and world building, Laurel's punching up the term 4 days. You will find that we kind of are really obsessed about time. And the longer you spend in that imaginary world, the more detailed, obviously, that world can become, and the better relationships that can be formed between you and the other people in that world. So time continues to be like our number one thing. It's maybe the number one obstacle for our presenters.
But
we ask for time, and we ask people to give time, hoping that they understand that the reward for giving that time is irreplaceable. Right?
Well, and as theater artists working in games, we think about, we have a lot of conversations with presenters or audience members in theater that say 8 hours, but to someone playing a game, 8 hours is nothing. That's just scratching the surface of like a really good, like how long have you committed to a long play game that you really cared a lot about? And how long did it take, 300 hours in Baldur's Gate?
So we just
Absolutely.
love you can bestow upon a character in 90 minutes versus like 10 and 450 minutes.
Yeah.
Like incomparable. So the other projects that so there are sort of like core touring shows at the moment, asses.masses, Culture Capital, which is a card game about the arts economy as well. 2021, which is a show that was made with largely a separate team, but was produced and toured by by us now. Also as a video game, sort of like a live standing carnival. And then these two new shows, Dragons, which is being developed for young audiences to tour through schools about dragons, power, chaos, fun things. And All Rhino, which is going to be an adaptation of IUNESCO's Rhinoceros, about fighting back against the All-Right. So that should be fun. This is where we are this weekend. If you're not coming, there's still tickets, I think. We just expanded the ceiling.
Should we play the trailer?
Let's play
Give you a taste.
This need convincing. Let's go. No school, right?
So this is a little taste of what it feels like to attend asses.masses. Oh.
Asses in a nutshell, it's a video game for one controller that is played in a theater in which an audience of X size takes turns at the controller to play out the story. It is an epic story in 2D and 3D, and the game shifts various game forms, multiple plot lines, 15 ensemble character, or 15 members of an ensemble character. It's big, it's operatic in some scale, it's got great music, as you just heard. And what is it all about? It's about a herd of unemployed donkeys who are trying to get their jobs back after having been replaced by machines. We have replaced the actor in the theater with video game machines. So if you're already seeing the connections as to like why we did what we did, that's why we're doing what we're doing. Do we want to tell the story? So,
Oh, it's a herd of donkeys.
yeah. So that's how it works. You want to say more about how it works? Some people take this. Yeah, you get it.
Yeah, I think the real point here is one controller for an audience of players. So when you think about playing a video game for 8 hours on your own, that's one thing. But imagine you have 200 new friends and you are all going to play it together, but you are all going to have to share the controller. And this is a really big part of that durational time element Patrick was talking about earlier. When we think about these social contracts we make with each other when we go into a theater or when we're attending an event with each other, how are we going to negotiate who gets the controller at which time? And then how are we going to pass that off between players? When are different players needed for different tasks that come up through the game? And how does a group of relative strangers really get to organize themselves and create a kind of proto-society in the theater over that sheer amount of time?
And this is where, so there is a big reflection amongst, like, we're a very politically reflective group, but we are also very Canadian. So if anybody understands how a Canadian parliamentary system works, we don't vote for our leaders. We vote for a party that is then represented. The leader of that party becomes the head of the government. So you can think about like how we are very, like, there's all these ways that you can be reflecting on how leadership is cultivated, the platforming opportunities for different types of leadership to emerge within a community. And that doesn't always mean voting for like a single entity, but a constant shifting of that leadership position is quite normal to us. It's not as static as these like 4-year blocks that you might experience if you are from this person. Taking turns. Oh yeah, we should talk about the basement. So, well, yeah,
Politics of the basement is a great way to describe kind of what Patrick's talking about. That idea that, again, we're going to share the controller. Sometimes we're going to watch. Sometimes we're going to yell out. Sometimes we're going to disagree. Sometimes we're going to have to press pause and all go to the bathroom. These are all things that are going to happen while we're playing together. And so we're just really amplifying that basic negotiation that you would have in your basement, just bringing it to a main stage theater like at ICA.
And if you're wondering, like, yes, we are millennials, which means we grew up in an era where this was the normal way of playing video games with our siblings and friends. And looking back at that time in our lives and those those hours, years together, this is a very normal thing for a certain demographic of people, just repositioned, reframed, and, as Laurel said, amplified.
Yeah. And one of the ways that we view Asses.masses, yes, as a video game for the stage, but we also view it as a collective experience. And as the producers of the show and show operators, we work with all of the presenters to create what we call a radical hospitality around the show. If we're going to ask humans to join us in a theater for 8 hours, we really wanted to make sure it was a tantalizing proposition and that they were taken care of throughout the experience, and that hosting really sets the tone for how we're going to work together inside the theater. So Asses.masses has 4 intermissions, which happen every 2 episodes. We provide a menu of free food and snacks. There's a dinner, and this is all included with your ticket. Each intermission, a new snack, a new type of food will appear. And this is a chance for audiences to talk, to get to know one another, to check in, to stretch, to refresh. Yeah, and to also refresh like who was playing, right? If you were playing up until intermission, there's sort of a natural break that gives a pause for someone else to take over.
We should also say you are being taken care of by our staff and presenting bodies, but also you're not totally scot-free in terms of taking care of each other, because all of these intermissions are of no fixed duration. That means that the audience is going to decide when to start playing the next chunk of episodes, which might seem crazy, but it's never let us down yet.
So that idea of this idea of it being a super awesome game night at your friend's house, mixed with sort of an unforgettable like movie marathon with a healthy dose of political uprising, epic storytelling, and a variety of gameplay modes, delicious food at intermissions, and lots of donkeys.
Does that segue us to donkeys? Nope.
The numbers.
So yeah, these are just some fun stats to share with you that we are performing Asses.masses in, at the moment, 10 languages. That has given us also a kind of powerful opportunity for connecting with people, especially through games. particular game form in a globalized world where like these consoles became available to everybody and these references are shared by cultures all over the world.
I haven't updated this yet, but we're at 51 shows worldwide. So this will be our 51st show. 52 this weekend at ICA. Yep.
Yeah, which is crazy. And we've done shows as big as 375 and as small as 25. It just depends on the city that we're in and where we go. And that also teaches us about how the game can breathe and scale depending on the people in the room. But always we want to make sure that people feel like the way they play it is the right way it's supposed to be.
So what's 52 times 8? 8 hours? Anyway.
I mean, plus tech and strike and let's not think about it.
Many hours. Okay. All right. So our team is also international. So as Patrick mentioned, we're from Canada and our core team was based in Canada. And as the project expanded, and we'll talk a minute about that kind of genesis and that journey, we grew to include other collaborators worldwide, as well as our incredible translators who work very closely with Patrick, our resident polyglot, to bring both like literally translate the game into other languages as well as adapt all of the humor, the references, the in-jokes, the names of the donkeys, all these sort of nuances that change depending on what language you're working in.
If you haven't heard this yet, but it's full of ass wordplay. It just turns out that the word ass shows up in the English language in a lot of different ways, whether that's a massacre, assassinations, or
astounding, assistance, assembling.
Words to like suture.
Yeah.
We're talking about worlds, like how does a world feel? What does the world sound like and feel like? Well, if you've got high Marxist ideological like critique, maybe a bit of ass wordplay balances out, you know, there's something for everybody if that's gonna go over someone's head. So yeah.
So where did the idea come from?
You always get questions. So basically, when I was in my MFA, I found a picture about a donkey teaching a group of other animals from a 15th century woodcut. And that donkey drawing was supposed to be a critique of the English education system in the 1500s. It was a sort of a statement saying that donkeys are stupid and look, all the education, like that our teachers are stupid too. I became interested in that because it turns out that donkeys aren't stupid. And that picture led me to sort of digging at a surface of how over like the entire world, it has come to represent stupidity or ignorance, even though if you ask anyone who has met a donkey or has worked with a donkey, it is not stupid. So where does this alignment of the pejorative representations of a donkey align with the pejorative, like historical undermining of the representations of the working class? That's what I became interested in. And I spent like 2 years basically chunking my way through every representation of donkeys in literature, cinema,
fables,
political rhetoric, and so on, to try to figure out what is the best way to encapsulate this dichotomy or like this tension between the working class and the donkey. Somewhere along the lines, I got very excited by David Lynch's Rabbits, how to play donkeys. I thought about, oh, maybe like I could restage that and there'd be a donkey playing a video game in the living room. That's sort of like one of the first early moments of donkeys in video games. What would that kid be playing? Well, they'd probably be playing like Stardew Valley. Because also at this time, we had all of this flourishing of games where people had to work. And it became increasingly normal to have like labor spoofs in the form of video games. Milton and I had happened to have started making another game, but the card game we talked about, Capital. So we were thinking about, like somewhere in the world, we were also thinking about games on stage. I tried a version of something with donkeys as a lecture, which looked like this. And it had like similar sort of like Marxist attitudes of donkeys. It didn't feel so great. Then we thought maybe we could get money to make a bigger show. We didn't get that money. So in the end, Milton and I found ourselves on stage in an empty theater with 300 seats, doing YouTube tutorials on how to make video games. And that is actually kind of like where the first scenes, well, actually not really. We started working together. So what I'm trying to say by imposing on this is that there's so many like layers and histories as you are repeating and repeating and trying to find a way to find a form that best fits these symbols. We started by doing some documentary things. We scrapped it. We started again with this epic 25 minutes of donkeys going on their first protest. Something about that seemed to click. We tested it in Portland in front of an audience of 100, and somewhat by happenstance, with no previous like player testing whatsoever, we found that an audience came alive when they were given a single PlayStation controller and a world with relatively familiar mechanics to anyone who played like Pokemon or Zelda. And from there, we started to build. We built in the wrong direction. We built episode 2, and then we burned it. And then we started again. And Laurel came on as the dramaturg because we realized that we needed help. We are not trained game designers. We are not trained programmers. We are not trained animators. But we knew that the confluence of these ideas, the donkey, the video game, the questions around labor, the questions around leadership were strong. And so as we started to focus ourselves in different attentions, we knew that the team needed to be bigger, which is Laurel.
So, sure, absolutely.
Tell us what a dramaturg is.
It's a great question. And we were talking yesterday about sort of the differences between the American and the Canadian school of dramaturgy, but I like to look at dramaturgy. If you think about the etymology of the word is related to words like metallurgy, I always like, because it's the idea of shaping something, making something. So a dramaturg is someone in theater that kind of holds a lot of the context around what you're making. They can take a lot of different forms, but in Canada, in my background, is new play development dramaturgy. So what that is working with playwrights from the very beginning of an idea. So you work with the playwright as the idea is starting to form. You would read early drafts of their script. You would make suggestions. You would also start to help them with like research that would flesh out the world of their show. So they, we were talking last night about like every time I would start a new project, I would have to learn something new. So for this project, I'm going to learn all about Mark Rothko. For this project, I'm going to learn all about a particular scientific theory. For this project, I had to do a deep dive into the world of video games. So I could really start to think about that core concept of how in a theater, we're going to embody the story that we're telling using video game mechanics and video games tactics rather than typical theatrical scripting. So dramaturgy, really looking at that idea, you kind of become like this, and again, there's different forms of it. If you sometimes are hired to work for a theater company where you read scripts and you assist with programming. Sometimes you're in charge of creating bridges for an audience into a work. So that's writing playable essays or hosting talks or really talking about the history of a play that's going on at a theater. All of these things are dramaturgy. But I like to use it in that sense of someone who can start to make connections between the ideas that you're working on in the show and really start to think about like, what does this need? What else do we need? What other references should we gather? Who else should be here? And really, how are we going to always think about that entry point for an audience? So how are we really going to make sure if this is a theatrical piece that they are considered at every step of the way?
And I think as the three of us as the sort of like core drivers of the project, yeah, we have to always keep each other's blind spots in check, right? Like and we sort of make this joke that Laurel is also the co-writer on the show because there's too much text. It's like there's just someone like we were all in it, and if someone is studying the characters and knows how they all feel and think, why wouldn't that person be able to contribute the text to what they're going to say in the next episode? It just makes sense. So like share the load.
Yeah, there became a point where just giving notes on a text piece wasn't helpful anymore. And Patrick would say, well, have you got a better offer? And then that became part of that. But, Patrick and I at the beginning would work really closely on like developing, for example, in video games, you often hear about like a story Bible or the idea of character sheets where this is the character's profile. So anytime that character is on screen and talking, here's how to keep consistent their vocabulary, the style, the kind of punctuation we're going to use. Asses.masses is all done through text delivery. So we're going to talk in a moment about kind of the limitations of writing for things that are read versus things that are said out loud and kind of how that is a really unique proposition when you're talking about script writing. So asses.masses, after I joined, we were just at the point, again, we were all theater kids. So we were funding this thing through the Canadian Arts Council and through theater grants that we were able to get.
You convinced them to fund a video game.
And biggest impact on our development trajectory was getting the largest investment that is possible in Canadian theatre, which is through the National Arts Centre's National Creation Fund. So this is an extraordinary fund that we had to basically go in and do a pitch, multiple pitches for, and go through a very lengthy process, again, of convincing them to fund a video game.
They funded.
But it really gave us the ability from that point to be able to hire additional artists. So this is where we brought in our 2D and 3D international teams, and really gave us a bit like more resources. Again, a drop in the bucket of what a video game studio would have to develop this work. But from the Canadian theater system, we maxed out everything that was available, all levels of government, as shown in our.
And this is actually good. So this is, and I think this still maintains our understanding of our role within the landscape that we're in. Asses is a bit of a battering ram in some contexts, right? Like, no, you can go to any of the theaters we've played in with a video game or something of its type and say, I saw you do this a year ago. Would you be interested in what I'm making? And they can't say, well, we don't do that, because they've clearly done it. So they've got to find other grounds to like reject our next project. But really, I think that so the creation fund cannot say they don't fund that type of work.
And in fact, they've since asses.masses funded it again.
They funded it again, even though they explicitly said they weren't interested in tech.
So, but it was interesting because in the pitch meeting, just to bubble about, again, the role of a dramaturg, how you can start to like make broader connections to the project. I remember looking at the jury and saying, think of an opera. Think of the epic storytelling that can happen over this duration. This is akin to the form we're using. This is, this is a new kind of playable opera experience. And it was just an analogy that the particular jury was able to comprehend, because they really felt alienated by this idea of video games, by the idea of technology. So we had to really bring it back to storytelling. Yeah. And how is this a new mode of telling a very ancient story?
His Canada Council grants were all full of this, like, once upon a time, theater was the chorus, and then Thespis emerged from the chorus and became the first actor. It's like that. We're using everything we had in our books to try to sell this idea to the people who would, because we are ineligible for funding for video games. We are like contemporary art. We are not for profit commercial entity. You cannot get grants for creating video games from the commercial wings of our funding systems in Canada because we do not have a revenue plan, and we never will.
So after we got our team together, we really undertook a very labor-intensive process that was really happening during the pandemic. We were just chatting with Celia earlier about like what was possible then and the time we had and the kind of focus that was available to us, which is really unprecedented in my career. So the ability to actually spend time playing video games, again, as a dramaturg, as all of the team, like developing a shared vocabulary. What are the games that are inspiring us in the way that they are telling stories, some of the mechanics they're using. So we're going to run you through kind of a wave of references.
And the function of these references are really to show that like wherever you start is, I think, okay, right? So, and we have, our team has a very wide range of experience with video games. Like Laurel, you just said you started in earnest around this project.
Yes.
Milton has played an unbroken amount of time in his life from the time he was a child till now. I played up until I was about 13, 14, 15, 16. And my life was defined by video games and sports until that time. And then I became a theater kid. But at some point in time, I played Journey, and I was like, oh shit, things have changed. Like, they're not the games that I played when I was a kid in the early 2000s. And then Milton was like, well, you have to play Nier, because it's got this story arc structure that's very interesting. I was like, great. Then I played Evil Land with him, and we were like, hey, look, you can change game forms constantly. And then, so we sit down, we start making asses.masses. And what are the common points between Milton and I at that time? Final Fantasy and the epic. We realized that we jettisoned this documentary approach that I had been interested in, because if we were going to make a space for video games in the theater, we had to do the thing that that theater thought it was better, which was character, drama, epic. We're like, well, great. Guess what? Final Fantasy is great at all those things. So let's borrow that. And you can even see the blue boxes we use are a direct sort of thank you to Final Fantasy VII. And then Kentucky Route Zero, which is made by Cardboard Computer, was a bunch of theater geeks who went on to make video games. We said, oh, look, we're not crazy. other people have done this too.
I actually have a play script, which is a chapter from Kentucky Route Zero that was republished as a play. So there was this incredible kind of referencing through Kentucky Route Zero, the way it uses text delivery, the way it was like staging some of its scenes. We just found so fascinating. And the conversations that were happening throughout that game. It's really beautiful.
It's beautiful. And so we have some whatever reference is useful to you in the writer room or in the mechanic building. Great. Once we started to make a game that was 3 episodes, 4 episodes, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, we started to move into a phase where not only could we program what we wanted to program, like without YouTube tutorials, because just remember, it's running on an entirely YouTube-driven team. So we would come to a new episode and say, well, what's the next part of the story? Oh, well, it's in a mine. Okay, well, what games feel best in a mine? Well, there's something about enclosure, tight spaces, navigating. Okay, well, maybe we can use platformers. Great. Let's look at platformers now from a very, very articulated, focused perspective as directors and creators. Let's play Celeste all the way through to understand how hard it is. But also what feels great. What are people saying are the best ones? And then how do we learn from the mechanics, not preload? So if you think about I had done all this preloaded learning for donkeys so that in our writing room, I could be like, hey, that doesn't really feel like donkey things, or that's great. Golden ass, yes. Gods, yes. Transformation, yes. These are in the lore, they're in the world. But as we build through the episodes, we go and look for what do we need. And based on Laurel's playing, based on Milton's life of playing, and my youth, we usually could find references that would help us achieve the goal that we wanted to have in that particular moment.
I'll give a shout out to Natazione, which is a video game written by a dramaturg and a theater artist named Hannah Nicklin. And Hannah Nicklin does an incredible GDC talk called Kill the Hero, Save the Narrative World. That was very influential to me at the beginning of asses.masses. Because this whole idea of how do you write for a community? How do you write for an ensemble of characters? How do you use a kind of multiple middles approach to game design where the player has the agency to go and talk to the person down at the docks, the old man in the house, to sit and tend a garden? And how is it that can decenter this idea of a video game being one hero's journey, but being about the life of a community over time?
And that became particularly important as we realized that we wanted asses.masses to be this shifting perspective ensemble journey, right? We didn't know that when we were even in episode 2.
Yeah.
We had done our first shift. We'd done something to our first character. No spoilers, you'll find out. But also we were like, hey, what are the best examples of ensemble storytelling that we all could jump in on and have a relationship with? 15 Dogs is a book by Andre Alexis. We all love it.
It's where dogs have consciousness given to them, and so they become poets and philosophers and have these rich inner lives.
Totally. Pompoko, which if you've seen it, it's a beautiful movie by Celia Pearce, and it was exploring similar themes that we were interested in just from 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier in Japan. And Tanukis. And then also, this is just sort of standing in for a general HBO ensemble character structure that was so prevalent for the first 15 years of the 2000s in the sort of golden age of television. And we learned a lot about how to structure an episode with hooks and things by using those tools, but then obviously shifting them into our super artsy.
We also went and visited donkeys. So we took a trip to the Donkey Sanctuary of Canada, where we met some incredible donkeys, and at least one of them used to be a performer. So the sanctuary is where donkeys were rescued or donated by their owners, and it became really important for us to actually go touch a donkey, really get a chance to be up close and personal with them as our subjects.
This donkey's name is Apollo. It is a donkey that actually was sponsored by, and every show that we do in every city, we sponsor a donkey in the name of the presenter, so that they get random mail from.
They get a little picture of their donkey. They get to hear the donkey's story.
We still do that for every single presenter.
Absolutely. So how do we approach the game design? Given all our references, given all our background in theater, how the heck do we sit down and make a video game? So we'll talk about the programming, we'll talk about the writer's room, and we'll talk about, again, designing the social experience for the audience who we like to think of as our herd.
So as mentioned before, YouTube. This was prior to ChatGPT. You are gonna embark on a video game making thing. I highly recommend just crunching those YouTube tutorials. I can't underestimate. I can't actually can't guess the amount of hours that we spent trying things out and just trying to work within. We are devised theater kids. So does anyone know what devised theater is as a concept? So I'll tell you. So basically, when you think about theater, maybe you think that there's a playwright, they write a script, then the director takes the script and they hire some actors and then they tell the actors to do things a certain way on stage. Devised theater is where there's no script at the beginning, everybody makes it together. Maybe there's a director from the get-go, maybe there's not, but everybody kind of figures shit out at the same time. And that's our training. That's definitely Milton and my training. And it was how we were approaching this thing too, which is one of the things we often say in that kind of practice is, if it's in the room, it can be in the show. If it's not in the room, it's not in the show. So what you can do, if you would go around at the beginning, hey, can you do a backflip? Yeah, you can. Okay, cool. We'll figure out a way to do a backflip in the show. We don't know where it's going to happen, but it would be cool, right? Maybe it would be thematically connected. Do you speak another language? Oh yeah, you do. Oh, maybe your character's from this part of the world, and you would just work on what you actually know how to do. We knew how to do nothing, so we had to build a certain amount of knowledge to be able to get it in the room. But that also functioned as a very intense limit on our capacities, especially as we started to aspire to shifting game forms along the way. So those might seem kind of like a tension, but we knew that we had to shift game forms because we were going this epic distance. And every time we shifted game forms, we very early on learned that it breathed new life into the room. And ding dong. So as we are trying to encourage change of leadership, energy, cultivating energy, directing of energy, in such a hands-off kind of experience where the audience has this sort of radical agency over the pace and flow of the game, how could we still influence it? Well, changing character, changing game forms.
We did a lot of play testing. So we play tested both our game and we play tested by curating ultimate game nights at the theater where we were in residence in Toronto during part of our development phase. And we were really asking the question, what games are fun to play and what games are fun to watch other people play? And these are two different questions. And it is surprising how sometimes it really breaks your assumption. A game could be super fun to play, something like Overcooked, for example. Turns out not that fun to watch people play because there's a very limited ability for you as the spectator to be involved besides screaming, make the hamburger.
And it's really hard to keep track of who's good.
Yep, absolutely. So at the beginning, our kind of litmus test was if Patrick couldn't program it, it would be cut. But we still dreamed to the limit, even when we made asses of ourselves.
And that was it was kind of an accident. It just we fell into the role. When you look at the credits of how the show kind of breaks down, people becoming taking on different roles. I ended up being the one who I'm really good with languages. So learning a computer language, I'm not the computer guy on our show. I would very confidently say that is Milton.
Yeah.
But I ended up being the programmer for reasons of just speed, fluency, and I'm also the animator. And so that meant that there was a kind of we would build ideas, and then we'd push them through the cheese grater of my capacity. They'd come out, and then we'd all go well, this is what it is. Song. And then we work together to kind of massage and make it to someplace that we could all agree on is okay, it's working.
Another important part of devising theater and our backgrounds is this idea of kind of a skills audit of your collaborators. So yes, a backflip, but also for example, Milton was very good with video editing and music. And so he was able to bring in and build 3D portions, really got excited about 3D and really pushing his technical limitations as well as we kept building.
But he was also a projection designer. So code-based programming is the standard way to do projection design in things like Isadora, if you're familiar with that program, or Touch Designer. So there was these ways that the programs, even as they're growing up, Unity, 7 years ago, didn't even have certain capacities that it does today. And I think we were even talking yesterday that if we had started the game this year, would we have used Godot instead of
Unity.
Like, it's
Yeah.
all very contingent on a very particular time and place, even in the history of, what is accessible for free online stuff.
So one of the things I also said in the National Creation Fund pitch session was I said, this is the most ambitious script I have ever worked on. And we really had to, as well as building our programming vocabulary and skill sets, we also had to keep trying to refine this idea of how are we writing a video game. Again, something we didn't have a lot of experience in doing, and certainly not doing as a collaborative process. So after a lot of Google Sheets and Word documents, we actually wound up migrating to Miro, which is a visual whiteboard program. But for us, Miro gave us the ability to be able to start to script branching narrative, as well as to paper test, very important in game design, different locations and scenes to be able to really start to, and again, we're all online, we're all looking at this together, really being able to look at something before Patrick would take it into programming and animation.
Yes.
So for example, this is what the back end of an episode looks like. This is a branch where the audience gets to decide if they're going to the circus or the zoo. If they go to the circus, this happens. If they go to the zoo, this happens. And we were cutting and pasting the dialogue out of Miro into Fungus at the time, which was was Unity's text program that it was using.
For a plugin, actually, from
Plugin.
So this is just the layer of text, right? Like there's a action. We weren't as much representing action in these sort of horizontal bar kind of things. But that was a necessary step for us. Like we had to figure out on our own that, we can't use, even though all the text gets put back here, and it's very confusing for translators to try to figure out who's responding to what in this long list of.
We really wanted to look at branching. And so in our world building, we were saying when a player picks X, where does it go? If they pick this, we go this branch, we go this branch. And that just really defied the spreadsheet for us, kind of broke it out. So in asses.masses, players make choices both big and small, both obvious and hidden. So sometimes there's an obvious choice like circus or zoo, left or right. And sometimes there are choices that we make for the player based on what they've decided. So different dialogue branch options, again, really inspired by games like Kentucky Route Zero, or choosing a certain dialogue or to have a slight tone. When I think about Disco Elysium, a tone to my conversation, a kind of emotional tenor in the room will then shift.
You have the Arabic house, are you here?
No, we didn't touch anything. Yeah. So yeah, this is also very important.
Yeah.
It is a video game.
It's set.
You think about other theater peeps who are like, yeah, it's a video game, but we're theater peeps, and they are secretly kind of doing this stuff. We were very actively rejecting the members of our scene who were espousing their video game theater show, but it was actually very clocked at a very specific and now it's over in 2 hours.
More like when we were scripting the branches, we just thought about opportunities where we could create a branch for an audience that they wouldn't necessarily know about right away. So that's not always as obvious as left or right.
And I think the main way to think about branching, because we should be clear, asses.masses is an epic narrative inspired by the generations of storytelling from the sort of mid-days of Final Fantasy. So that means that we set out to tell a story with a very particular political and philosophical worldview. And how we get to the ending, again, this multiple middles that Phil was talking about that we learned from Jetson, is where we really started to invest our energy, because it is not just about what is on screen. It is about also what is in the room. So the people I think who don't get asses.masses the most are people who walk their eyes to the screen and forget about their game, their comrades who are beside them.
Whereas we've had many people come to asses.masses who have never touched a controller and who have commented on how different the show felt each day, or have really noticed. There was a great article by Jen Stevenson and Derek Manderson that I've shared with Celia that really talks about really observing the audience, and that show is happening in parallel to the show happening on screen.
So when you pick the flavor of conversation or interaction, what is that flavor doing to an entire room and the way that the room walks out that theater reflecting on the story that they experienced. That's one of the things that we were interested in, and also like trying to cultivate that mattered. It matters how we negotiated those points.
So we talked earlier about this idea of a big challenge for us is how to write in the voices of a herd of donkeys, each with their own personalities, using only text that would be read and that would need to be paced to the speed of a player pressing X through the dialogue. So we looked for moments where we could show and not tell and really embody the character's experience in the actions the player needed to take in a scene, jumping over, something to really illustrate someone's internal struggle, having a battle of a character against oneself instead of a monologue about soul searching, but also dialogue options were this method to change character perspective and this question of like, who am I, who are we all at any given moment? So this is a few of our donkeys, and you can see just the way that we were able to very simply use things like punctuation at the end of a sentence, all caps, a little bit of slang, or really speaking. The other thing we talked about, and we talked about this yesterday, was like when if a sentence began with a subclause, it was not as effective because people reading it in the audience would lose track of what the subject of the sentence was. So for example, if this sentence read, one of the most spiritual things I've ever done with my life is being an artist, then by the time we've gotten to being an artist, we've kind of gotten lost in the rest of the sentence.
If they double hit X,
yeah,
they'll speed fill, like you can hit X to fill the box right away, and then X to move to the next dialogue. So if they double hit, you could lose the last word. So unlike like in a Shakespearean context where the final words of the line of the iambic pentameter are the most important, where you're hit, the subject and the verb at the earliest part of the text box is the most important, because you know that you're most likely going to see those if someone fucks it up and jumps through.
Being an artist is one of the most spiritual things I've done with my life, right? So by the time I get to done with my life, great, but we all understand being an artist is the point of this sentence. That is what this character is communicating.
And to be honest, this is not easy for like I identify as a writer. And when you get put in that box and you're like, you can't use long words. You can't use inverted sentence structures to make things feel more like, lively.
Like the early days of writing for Twitter.
It was a time. What a world to be trying.
Absolutely. So this idea of designing for an ensemble, for designing for a herd that is the audience at Asses.masses. So we were both world building like our characters in our story, and we were also looking at how to design and the experience of the audience as our herd. And as we've mentioned, Asses.masses creates a bridge between those who like to gather in theaters and those who like to gather around a game. So the audience at the different, because we're usually being presented in a context of a theater performance festival, maybe we're at a theater, maybe we're at an arts institution. So this audience is going to include both gamers and non-gamers. So the game also needed to make space for those really familiar with and those not familiar with how to use a controller and what kind of game forms and references that we were making.
Yes.
So one of the ways that we maintain morale in our herd, as I mentioned, was through the power of snacks. So at every interval, really having free food and being able to offer this kind of like long form experience that people are coming to, that they kind of had the ability to feed themselves, have food that they wouldn't normally have in a theater, and really that can bring some of the fun.
We describe it as like a 12-year-old birthday party and like a healthy wedding, and
totally. Asses.masses is also a relaxed performance. So the lights remain on at a low level throughout the show. And this is so audience members can move to and from the controller, but also, and as importantly, so they can see each other. Because there's a certain, again, we come back to that idea of social contracts, there's a certain contract that comes about when we're all sitting in the dark. It means I don't have to necessarily take accountability for what I might yell out at someone playing, or I might be able to just kind of drop out, disappear, sit back, and not feel compelled to participate.
But we learned that, like, as we sort of explain the sort of this genealogy of the world building and the project, if you can walk away from this talk today and be like, they didn't know anything at the beginning except all the things they did know. We used to do the show for the first couple of days, the first runs in the dark. We used to do the show where like no one introduced it. And we learned that actually coming out at the beginning, you'll see us tomorrow. Be like, sup?
We come out, we say
Thanks so
hello,
much for
we
being here.
explain what's going to happen, that there will be food. We introduce ourselves. We're out at intermission chatting with folks, really, again, acting as hosts.
And that is also part of the world building that takes place in the theater itself, right? Like we are as much building a world in the world of the game, but asses.masses is just not what's on screen, it's also what's in the room. And so we have a responsibility also to build a world that all of us are actually physically in, and it has certain rules and expectations and comforts, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and this again is because we've delegated the labor of the show, like the labor of playing, to the audience. And so we really do see how the presence of the game controller changes the relationships we have to the theater space and to each other. And so it felt necessary, again, to make this a enticing proposition to come and play with us, to really ensure that that hosting was at the forefront. And often we see people who don't know each other. These are photos from our recent production at the Sydney Opera House in January. And these were folks that didn't know each other until they came to the show, and suddenly they're posing together, they're coming back the next day, they're bonding with donkey characters, and they're really feeling like a sense of ownership over the experience and the community that's built. I think we're getting to a point where we'd love to take some questions. So yeah.
Response feedback. Woo!
Absolutely.
So sweet.
I was like, that's a lot of intro.
Do you want to share?
Oh, yeah.
Some
Sure.
All right.
Sweet.
Sweet.
You keep an eye on the time for us.
Absolutely.
fun. Anybody got tickets already?
I'm gonna start by opening it up for questions, then I'll talk to you, I have a bunch of notes.
Okay.
And maybe if people have a few questions now, then I'll like. Anyone?
Yeah.
Well,
I think my biggest question is about pacing, which is just like, because it's a video game and some people play video games quicker than others.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that like by the time you hit the 7.5 to 8 hour mark, that like you reach a satisfying end, where they're like
We don't. We make a theater sign a contract that says that we are there until the game is done. And they have to pay for additional security and or like staff to support us until we are in.
in case it goes long.
Yeah.
This goes on.
The episodes are structured to each have like little each chapter has certain journeys that characters are going on, certain games that are completed. So we really are, again, we're in the world of a narrative, we're in the world of a story that's moving forward at a certain pace. There have definitely been moments where audiences will get stuck on particularly challenging moments of the game. And sometimes that can add time. And then there's other moments where someone will
Skip everything.
First time we ever did our episode 4, for example, someone ran right through the entire open world with sort of a sandbox style, and they ran right through it out the other side, and we're done in 10 minutes.
And to be honest, our biggest concern about time is making sure that the food is out for because when they ran through that level, we're like, oh shit, like front of house, it's over now, like get it out, get it ready for everybody. And that's so like we're constantly like if you see us in the back on our computers messaging, we're talking to catering mostly to be like, are they gonna skip the orgy dome? Oh no, okay, they're gonna go, oh no, no, it's 2 minutes, intermission in 2 minutes, intermission in 10.
But interestingly, as the show has toured, the length has remained fairly consistent. I'd say the longest an audience has taken is probably around 9 hours, and the shortest was in Korea, where
Just under 7.
just under 7. So you can go from like, maybe there's like people taking extended intermissions, maybe they want to take a 45-minute dinner break, an hour dinner break.
But
That's
what's
fine, too.
beautiful, like, so we're still directors. We still have like an interest in dramatic structure and things like that, right? And the emotions that come through the struggle of something like a character with an obstacle, and then when they succeed, there's this sort of like jubilation that comes from seeing the person you're rooting for win. We have designed a story and game that has those moments, but sometimes, depending on who the player is, the audience basically creates a meta moment in which a new struggle has been found because they just are lost. It's clear to us where to go, but they're all lost. There's 200 people, they're all yelling, nobody knows where to go, and eventually they find where to go within 15 minutes. Euphoric. And you're like, we didn't write that moment of struggle. but they created it inside of the world that we made. And so, yeah, our pacing was off from what we were saying as directors, but it was fine. And the flexible attention or the flexible focus that video games have, you know, you'd be in the middle of a really intense moment or ding dong, the pizza's just arrived. And you can get right back into, like, you can drop right back into the world somehow, and it works. Works. And so we see that often, that like a kind of a meta struggle is created within a group. And new wins are one.
All right, who else? Yeah.
So when you were talking about adapting for other languages and cultures, is there a culture in which donkeys are considered stupid? And like, how do you?
Not that I've discovered. I mean, there's
That's
definitely probably some communities in particularly maybe parts of Northeastern Africa that have like a more like a stronger love of the donkey, just because that's where it's from, and so it's gonna have like a longer term, you know, there's maybe more opportunity for it. But even in places where there's sort of, you know, still mainstays of like a cultural economy or like an economy, and like, yeah, they're maligned.
I think it's interesting also because in the United States, the donkey is the mascot.
That's right, it is.
So it has a very specific political category here.
It does. And so we were always aware of that. You won't find any references to the United States in asses.masses for multiple reasons, but one of them is that we didn't need to make a reference to it because it was already going to be, we knew that if it ever played here, there would be this projected layer on what is happening to our political spectrum. There's no, I'm not gonna say that, there's maybe.
Yes.
That show. But yeah, so we definitely recognize that, for example, in Catalonia, it is the national animal of Catalonia, is the donkey. Catalan donkey is like their animal. So when you have, you know, we're just a couple of years out from like the suppression of the independence movement in Barcelona. So we play there in the fall. That was interesting. Like, it has a whole other representational layer. It doesn't really have much of a history in Korea. So it comes with, again, a sort of different access, but it's also hyper like, not infantilized, but it's like cutified, right? Like you all see maybe donkeys on Instagram, like, like in reels and this kind of thing. So it's finding different relationships, both political and maybe less sort of pointedly political in communities around the world too.
I was wondering about that when you talked about the show you did about dragons. Because
Oh, that's coming. That's coming.
particularly in this class, dragons have come up as something that has a lot of different significance across different cultures.
That's one of the things that we're basically trying to zero in on. Milton is Chinese Canadian. And so when we were talking about dragons, we're like, hey, so dragons in this part of the world are like evil sort of extensions of a Christian, like, you know, they look the way they look because of the devil's representations in like earlier centuries. But in the Eastern cultures, the long Chinese or Japanese or Korean dragon represents luck and, you know, good fortune. And so how do we build a game? How do we build a world? How do we build a story that is going to be able to acknowledge those differences? The donkey seems to have a bit of a, I mean, because it's not mythological, it has a bit more of a shared thing about it. That's what at least we found so far.
Love that.
It was really interesting to me that you used brothers as very cool. I played that game and it was frustrating to like control the two characters at the same time. So there was some cursing and sweating. But then at the end, when it kind of completed the narrative, I realized why that choice was made. It was a powerful moment. So I was wondering if you want to learn more about like the decision behind like, there's going to be one controller for everybody, and is it kind of like the narrative or like there's another picture.
So the link to brothers is that the one controller is used at certain times in the game to control multiple characters. So there is a moment where there is playing with that idea of where do multiple players live on a controller, and then what happens when some of those characters go away, as in Brothers, which is such an good example of kind of how you can embody that imbue a controller with character, right? And with a kind of relationship between the player and that character.
And it also, but again, there's a meta moment. Like this is an optional path where you would discover this in asses.masses. And if the player wants to do it on their own and play both of those characters, they can. But sometimes they say, does anybody else want to be my right stick? Or my left stick? And that becomes its own moment. Our single controller philosophy is yes, because we change character every episode, sometimes multiple times within an episode. We are interested, and we were talking about this yesterday at Emerson, that one of the things that we learned early on in asses.masses is that when you have one person at the front of the room, they're actually all still part of the same group. And so they're at the front of the group, they're the leader of the group, but they have, like, their ears are available to everyone. As soon as you have a committee that forms around that controller, there starts to be like a distinction.
It's like an us and them, right? Because there's all of a sudden like 3 or 4 people gathered around that controller, and they're all talking to each other. We can't really hear what they're saying.
Yeah. And so we're starting, we're learning. We've created this, but as we make more games and we try to think about, well, how do you do more with that? The one player at the controls still seems to be the most powerful way of maintaining a collective audience in the world that is up there on the screen, on the stage. We were conduit of one player.
It's very counterintuitive.
It's very counterintuitive, but it really is like we have seen it every single time when the committee forms, the masses are.
Yeah, people start to sort of drop out a bit because it's like, oh, I guess that group is handling it.
I have a follow-up question and then kind of a lateral question.
Sure.
The follow-up question is, there is a lot of research that when you put male and female persons in a room with a computer game, the men will dominate the controller.
That's right.
Yep.
Does that happen in your show?
Not, I would say, the first person ever to play asses.masses was a woman unidentified person. I'm talking to her about that. But we have seen, I mean, actually last weekend, I would say that the majority of players in Boston were, I guess I didn't talk to them, but I would guess that they would be women identified individuals.
What I would say in my observation is that while it may start that way, the sheer 8 hours cannot sustain that level of domination, as well as the changing game forms that require different players. And I also witnessed in Sydney, we had an incredible moment where after the first block of episodes, so after first intermission, 4 women got up in front of the group and they asked the room to be more kind. And they said, we really want to make sure that everyone can get a chance to play. We're hearing a lot of yelling out. There was a person who was grabbing the control, like tried to grab the controller. People were just excited. You know, there was a lot of dominating in that first round. And this group said, what do you think? Are you with us? And it was one of those real room turning moments where I was wondering what was going to happen. And what happened was the whole crowd went, yes, to kindness. Let's do it. Let's work together. And it really shifted the tone and the way that everyone was working together. And I thought it was very, very interesting that was 4 women identified folk who got up in front of the room and said, we'd like to change the dynamic here because we're just beginning and we want to make sure we've got, we're going to be able to do the next 6 hours together. So let's change it. We don't like the way this is going.
And one of the things that in our designing of the story, so asses.masses was first started by 2 kids, right, in those first episode days, and then Laurel joined. And when Laurel joined, we were actually writing it in English, but then needing to translate it into Spanish because it premiered both in its first test that we did together, and then in its full length in Buenos Aires. So yeah, so that meant that all of our donkey names, like Old X and Smart X, had to have genders, which in English we were like, maybe they'll all just be they. Let's not project things on our donkeys. And
but very quickly
it was like, yo, you need genders for these donkeys right now because of the Spanish language, and we weren't going to use amigues and things like that. Like the X was just like how it was fitting within the groups and how it worked, because we had this particularly like old donkey. It felt very weird to have an old starchy donkey say things like "Hola amigues." So we had to make decisions, and that decision in Spanish then came back into English to change the way we wrote it in English, so that we were trying to be as explicit as possible about like the diversity of genders of our characters, so that people could project. And we also tried to play against those like expectations. Who's going to be what, gender? Does our heart die a little bit when we have a show that's largely dominated by men? Yes. Like that. I mean, I'm just gonna say, yes, it does. But we're not gonna we just hope that there is, I mean, in so many ways, on so many levels, Asses is a platform for us to practice these muscles of being together, of like collectively making decisions, being together, taking turns, checking our privileges, and all of the things that we can do, and I think that we all have the muscles to do, can be implemented on this day. We have a lot of great examples of people who are really good gamers being like, I don't need to play. This isn't the space for me to do that, but I'm really enjoying seeing people have this experience. Like, I know that I could totally beat this level in like when I see the answers. I'm happy to help from my position calling out. I don't need to be like, it's my turn. Like, let me dominate.
So I want to kind of back up a teeny bit, because I also wanted, and I saw you had your hand up, but I wanted to point something out that was really interesting, because it was also something that I do in my own theatrical LARPy work, which is the idea of the audience as an ensemble. So the characters are an ensemble,
yes,
this is a normal thing in theater, but the audience is also an ensemble. And you kind of alluded to something here, and I thought we could tease out a little more about that, which is that if you give the audience agency, emergent things that you did not predict what happens, you won't have it.
Yeah.
And each audience, I mean, I feel the same way about the class group. I was just telling someone about this particular group. And like, this group has a very distinctive personality.
Right.
Particular imaginary voice ensemble.
Yeah.
They're very noisy. Like when I exit the classroom, I can hear them down the hall.
Right.
Over wherever, which is great. I love that.
Stay
They're opinionated. They have all the things you want your students to have. But this idea that the audience is an ensemble, and that each group has a personality as an ensemble in the same way that a theatrical ensemble does. And there's a kind of, to me, what's fun when you describe that, those four female identifying people get up. To me, audience rebellion is a desired emergent power.
Right.
Oh yeah.
I once played I was telling them, these guys, because I was playing my first LARP was a World of Darkness vampire LARP at DragonCon. And in the middle of the LARP, there was this big sort of flip reversal in the plot. And I thought it was on purpose, but I found out later from my friend who I was playing with, that actually the players had rebelled against the GM and taken the bait. And that was kind of one of the moments when I went, I need to get into this racket. But I would just love to hear a little bit more about that idea of like, you're crafting the ensemble of the audience, but you're not controlling them completely. And what is that fine line between directing, but also leaving what I always describe to these guys as a player-shaped hole? What is the shape of the space that you leave for the audience to form their own ensemble, their interesting hole?
A couple of ideas.
Yeah. I think I really and this relates to asses.masses, and as well as a lot of other work that we do. This idea of creating a container, you've got the ingredients, but in theater, we talk a lot about how necessary an audience is. Can't have a play if you don't have someone watching. But in asses.masses, it's really like literal. We need someone to press X. So again, you're creating the conditions by which someone would want to do that. And also this idea of giving, and it's really, it is a bit of an optimistic vision, because you're giving the community of players the control over that. You give them that very simple container. You're going to press X, and then you're going to have an intermission, and you're going to decide how long it is. And all of those little pieces through the day, I think, are what build the kind of world. And if at the beginning someone's laughing or joking or shuffling it off or saying like, oh, like that's, silly, then by again, hour 8, we see the way the room has been built, how people are committed, how people are banding together and really like invested. So again, building that investment through an excellent invitation. I really, really come back to that term
Yeah.
as like something I think is so important.
Radical hospitality.
Absolutely.
So you'll see tomorrow and so we did this, we did it as kind of an accident. It's the leftovers of the documentary that I mentioned that like got scrapped. Where asses.masses begins with a bunch of questions.
Mhm.
And it begins with a bunch of questions because donkeys are supposed to be stupid. And so what better idea than to ask a bunch of donkey questions to a bunch of people who are apparently smarter than donkeys, and then see if they get them all right. And so there's this sort of like knowledge positioning, and it levels us, right, as an audience. But it also, there's moments where it changes languages, which is like a strategic thing to be like, do you know Spanish? Because if you know Spanish, all of a sudden you are someone in the room who has a superpower. Because you can read the thing that's on the screen. Maybe the other people in the room can't. And then the next question's in German.
I'm laughing. I'm sorry. This is very context specific. I'm laughing because, we used to have this Super Bowl show.
Yes. Oh, yes.
That's
It's like, nobody can understand it. You're like,
a lot of people in the world can understand it.
actually the second largest native speaking language in the world.
Yeah.
So we learned, again, I will say flat out, that was an accident. We made that scene as a way of beginning. It seemed interesting. It worked. We ran with it. We iterated on. That was, and it sort of has taught something about onboarding.
Well, it's tutorializing, right? So when we think about level building, we had to start with the tutorial. That quiz sets up the idea of how is this group going to work together.
Yep.
And then we get into our very first episode that takes place where you're a 2D pixel donkey on the farm going around and meeting all the characters. And that feels a bit more familiar to as a tutorial, because that's really where we're starting to figure out how to use the controller. What are the buttons we need to press?
But also,
How are we interacting?
and specifically though, if you were to have like good game design education, you would maybe put more things earlier in the game that would encourage other types of collaboration between minds. Asses.masses has a weird structure because it can't have those things early. We didn't know how to make them. So the second half of asses.masses is peculiarly more difficult.
Yeah.
Because we got better at making shit. So, and by better means like we actually could build these like much more technically challenging things. But technically challenging games, as Laurel mentioned earlier, are not ways of building like an entry-level community.
Well, we can't handle level 8 at level 1. We need, and again, that level design has to progress to a point that by hour 6, we're in a really hard stealth game. We're in a really hard moment.
But in level 1 and 2, like everybody can yell, go left. Everyone can see the donkey that you're not talking to. Like, why are you not up in the, no, go up, go up. Everybody has access to the ears of the player that way. And we build that. And so that is, we start, once we realized that we like retconned a bit, we went back, we added some things and like made some adjustments, but largely the story and structure is maintained as an evolving difficulty over the course of the day, which again,
Which is good video games.
it is, but we're, but in terms of like how
And good theater.
it is, but how we use those later forms,
Yeah.
how we really see the audience come alive in those later forms, we recognize, maybe some of those could have been used earlier at a certain point, but we just couldn't, like, so like it has it's got the funky shape it's got.
But as artists, it also really keeps returning back to like, we have to earn it,
Yeah.
And with this crowd kind of owning its struggles, they also get to own their success.
Yeah.
And that is not about me as the artist, that is about the crowd as the herd. So we've created these invitations, these containers, these provocations, these ways they're going to work together. But again, like the meta game that's playing out through the 8 hours, that's owned by them.
But we will see these crazy metagames.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie, like people like not even the struggle win stuff. They'll just say like, well, every time they jump, we're all gonna yell insert word. You're like,
Yeah.
for 8 hours?
There's slogans, there's chanting, there's anthems, there's
Like,
voices, there's
like Mission Impossible is the theme song for that character. And you're like, really? We're gonna do that for 8 hours? Yep. We're gonna read all the lines out loud and act them dramatically. You're like, okay, sure. Well, I guess so. And then it just becomes so. We often say people will ask us and sort of fetishize the like cultural differences. Like, how are we different from the Italians? How are we different from like the German players? But actually, the biggest everybody's much more similar than different.
Mhm.
But inside of cities is where we see the biggest differences. Just because it depends on who's in the room.
But that's the bleed. If you're thinking about LARP, that's our kind of like moment where I'm player, but I'm also person.
Yeah.
And it also is that, really that ability to like move through those two roles. I'm a spectator, I'm a player. And how is it that those things relate and don't?
So there's a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure.
So chat.
Give me a couple minutes at the end to send a shout out to Excite, which I failed to do at the beginning like I did.
Thank you, Excite.
So this is kind of like related to what we've already been talking about, but Hector's asking how are the players' choices reflected in the experience, because the story follows like a single arc. So can we assume that choices are more related to the character? Yeah. Which I think we're kind of be hinting at with the meta game and how as a collective you start.
But it doesn't sound like the story follows a simple arc, right?
The story I would say the story follows, it goes like, I think here's the metaphor that I use. And we disagree with this. And some of us will have different metaphors. But my metaphor is like epic poetry. That every time epic poems were sung, formed thousands of years ago in cultures around the world, they were told different. But there's no version of the Odyssey where Odysseus doesn't go home. How long Odysseus stays on the island having sex with Calypso, that is contingent on the poet and the audience who wants to hear that. But Odysseus always goes home. That is the story of the Odyssey. And you would be like, yo, poet, that's not, if they're like, yeah, he just stayed there. Like no cut to Penelope being pissed off. No, that's a different story. But how Odysseus gets there, how many of his homies get eaten by the Cyclops, how many waves crash on his boats and such, that is
So
contingent.
do you think it has that?
That's how I understand our story and how
Mhm.
even like in a contemporary idea around video game storytelling and like the sort of soft modularities, multiple middles, all this kind of stuff. I think that's an interesting way of understanding the like kind of ancient traditions that we can see contemporary video games of this type participating in.
So we do have an ending that is set, and what will change and where the variety comes in is who is in the ending, who is where, what role are they playing, what character has made it to the ending, what characters have not. And those are all directly related to different choices that players have made along the way.
As you were talking, I was reminded of the Playable Theater talk. It was in our Playable Theater Symposium that happened like 3 years ago from the people that created Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser.
Yeah.
And what they talked about, was that the one you guys read?
No, but this is Carol.
It was actually Sarah Thatcher.
Okay.
And she talked, who just won the Indicade Trailblazer Award this year. She talked about that they do, instead of doing a branching narrative, they do, I forget what she called it. It's like
Branching
a reverse branch, basically. So it's a group, maybe she called it a group, but the idea is everybody starts in a different place
Right.
and we all end up together.
Right.
Yeah.
So the core conflict that is the pinnacle of the show at the end,
Yeah.
everybody's involved in,
Right.
but how they arrive there, what role they have in that conflict, who they've aligned themselves with.
A lot of
Yeah.
our metaphor was around a lemon. So the idea of like, we're starting here, then we all go out.
Oh, nice.
And have the broadness of like experiencing the world in different ways and having had different, seeing different things along the way, go at circus or zoo, left or right, this character, that character, this choice, that choice. And then we kind of arrive at that ending of the lemon.
And
But
I
again, we have different permutations of what that ending looks and feels like, depending on where you've been along the way.
Branching characters, another thing that we talked about as an interesting thing. like, it's less about branching narrative, but branching character. Who are we gonna be? And again, you have to like, if you need it as like a what, this is a show that is a reflection on our relationship to revolution, to participating in political direct action, collective action. Are we saying that is inevitable? That like we must confront that in some way? Like there's reasons why we go the way we go, that are politically motivated, that are philosophically motivated, and that's sort of how our characters interface with these questions, and especially by the time the story reaches its climax and we think are sort of reflected in also audience members' relationship to these themes as well. So yeah.
Anything else from the?
Yeah, we just want to know if there are more opportunities to attend performance this
In Boston, no, but if you email the ICA, specifically John Andrews, bring it back. Bring it back. Our visas are good until 2028.
Sold again.
We could also bring it somewhere else.
We could bring it
Yeah.
That's a conversation.
So we do have show dates in November in Chicago.
We have a black box theater.
Fantastic.
Just saying, just saying.
We should say, we do asses.masses only in live context. We always get asked, can I get it on stream after? If we were into making Bobo's money, maybe we would have done that, but it's a lot of work. And also the context, as you can hear we're saying, is an important part. I mean, I think that's where like us as artists are kind of inserting ourselves into a certain conversation, saying, you could play this game anywhere. Yes, but what if you played it in this context? What would be amplified? What questions could be asked of us that would otherwise be occluded or eclipsed by just playing it in your business, right? And we actually ask that question in all our games, right? Whenever we try to on stage them, right? It's about what are the amplificatory possibilities, like the potentials of this space and this crowd of these people when a game is put in the middle of it, than if you played it somewhere else.
And the choice to have a single controller as opposed to these large scale input type experiences like choose your documentary. You've seen that
Yes.
where the audience votes on which direction the film goes. Yeah. So
So just one last question.
yeah,
Can you guys be part of Twitch-based Pokemon?
So we talked a lot about Twitch-based Pokemon in the early days when we started to do asses.masses, and that like yes, like we were very much aware of it. In the early days before we were doing our own animations and drawing, asses.masses was built entirely with Pokemon sprites. So like highly recommended actually. Like I still to this day prototype everything using Pokemon sprites because you can immediately get it up and running. You can even get someone on a bicycle, like just in terms of getting it out the door right away.
You got houses, you got trees,
You got houses, you got trees, you got roads,
you got
like,
rooms.
go build it in Pokemon and run with it.
Yeah.
And then replace, right? I mean, so many like why not? So we are Pokemon has a very important place in the history of asses.masses, including Twitch plays.
yeah.
The follow-up was really like if you would consider like doing like a Twitch stream where Twitch plays
Yes,
your
people ask us this all the time, especially since the pandemic is no.
And yeah, and there is a really, really strong emerging tradition of Twitch theater, which often involves large scale audience interaction with an individual actor or a small number of actors.
Right.
Yeah.
And so our argument though is that everyone in the room is equal, right? Like everyone in the room has an equal opportunity to be elected or self-elect to become the leader at the controller. And the idea that there would be a class system, this is even why we don't have couches. People always ask us, can we get couches? It seems like the right vibe for asses.masses. Can we get couches?
Just have a
No,
couple of couches
some couches, you know,
right in the front, maybe just a few bean bags.
They get too comfortable.
Well, not that actually, it's that then
People
people are
stand.
negotiating.
No, but people standing at the controller is a very important choice.
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
there's a stool for access purposes.
Yeah.
But you're right. They are not sitting on a couch being a passive player, but also we don't want it to have all of a sudden there's only a few people can fit on couches and then everyone else is in these like
It's just a secondary
Too comfortable.
one,
Yeah.
but it's actually not the comfort thing. It's that there's a secondary object of desire. The controller is the only thing that the public should theoretically be negotiating. And the idea that, is it my turn on the couch? That's a whole separate.
It's a whole other show.
You could just put a couch on stage and make that the show. It would be interesting, like, who gets to sit on the couch for how long during a movie marathon, right? So we've had many recommendations. How about couches? How about couches? They're like,
Yeah. But you're right about the standing, and that's a really essential ingredient as well, because it also limits the amount of time a player is going to stay there. Although we've seen all sorts of leans and squats and
they'll just tear the controller. You're like, oh my God. No.
So I think that's all we really have time for. Again, thank you for helping us out today. And I want to also just mention this was sponsored and produced under very, very short time frame by the Excite lecture series. We were lucky because I didn't get all the Excite game slots filled, so I had a budget to give you Excite. It's also the Department of Art and Design is covering Happy Day on Riria. And also it's co-produced by Playable Theater, which is a Northeastern affiliated nonprofit that focuses on high agency theatrical experiences. So thank you for coming out here in the snow, which is
yes,
it's snowing. And I said that when they came, I said, well, at least you're Canadian, so you're used to this.
oh boy. Thanks everyone. Thank you.